Hey, my name is Austin Shepard. I am a 25-year-old graphic design major here at EKU. I'm from Hazard, Kentucky, very small town in southeastern Kentucky, and yeah, that's pretty much all about me. I like video games, I like a lot of graphic design, and I spend a lot of time with my boyfriend.
So again, this is the Human Project, and the goal is to expose labels that people give each other and show the effects that those labels have, so that eventually people can just approach someone without a predetermined hate for them. And I feel like that's been a huge issue with everything right now. So the first question I want to ask you is, what label, if any, do you feel like has been placed upon you by either society or yourself? And then also go into detail about how that affects you.
I've actually had a few. One of the biggest ones is probably the stereotypical gay. A lot of people, they're like, oh, what, you're gay? And I'm like, yeah, I am. And I think I don't know if it's because I don't really look like the stereotypical what you would see in a movie gay, or what you would see, what you think of, that they don't think that I am. But that's one of the ones that really affected me. Then I've had this stereotype of being a lumberjack. I don't know if it's the flannel. I don't know if it's kind of like the more masculine side of me.
Does that go into the label of you being gay as well, with being labeled in the gay community?
Yeah, it really does. Like, whenever, like, before I met my significant other, I had a lot of trouble, like, talking to people because they would look at me and be like, oh, you're gay. And I'm like, yeah. They're like, well, you're just a lumberjack or a trucker. And I'm like, no, I'm just Austin, really. And so there was a lot of, like, issues of trying to find someone, trying to talk to some people because of the way I looked and the way I acted. They had this stereotype and had this kind of, like, thought of what I already was, and they were wrong.
So, has that affected you when you were a kid too, or was it just in recent terms? Like have you always been open about yourself?
Yeah, I really have. I kind of hid my sexuality for a very long time from, like, my parents and stuff, but a lot of my peers and a lot of my, like, teachers in grade school and high school knew about it. And they were really, really cool about it. But growing up, I always loved racing. I still do. So I was always under a race car, working on it. I liked going hiking. I liked doing these weird things of, like, going and looking at rocks. I liked, weird kind of like what you would consider masculine things. And whenever people thought of me as being gay, they would be like, oh, well, you can't be gay because you like working on cars. And I'm like, no, that has absolutely nothing to do with it. But they.
So would you say that you had, in terms of you being open in Hazard, what was the environment like in Hazard? Because I know that where I grew up, it wasn't very welcoming. What was your environment different in Hazard?
Not really. Like, in the area where I grew up and in Hazard itself, it is very they kind of have this negative mentality towards gay people. And, like, my professors and my teachers and stuff, they were very accepting, and my friends and stuff were too. But when it come to kind of the adults out in the world, or people, that were trying to hire me for jobs after I graduated high school, or really anybody else, just people I seen on the street, they had a very negative view of me being gay. When I actually graduated high school and was looking for jobs and trying to find jobs after I graduated nursing, I actually would get people that would deny me jobs because I was gay.
Are you able to recall a specific instance? Because I have one that I can tell you about too.
One of the biggest instances was when I was a nurse at the hospital. I had people who would come in as patients, and I would be assigned to them to help them as a CNA, and then as I was doing my internship, my kind of like exit clinicals, I would be helping them as a nurse, and they would look at me and be like, I don't want you because you're gay. And I would be like, cool. And so I would have to go back and tell my clinical supervisor or my boss, I'd be like, hey, I can't take care of this person because they don't want me to because I'm gay.
How did you feel the first time someone approached you that way because of your sexuality? Like how did you feel in that instance the very first time it happened?
Well, it was really, like, it was a shock, really. Like, at the time, I didn't really think that it was a thing that was happening, because I was just literally sitting there and I was introducing myself. And they're like, oh, you're Austin. I know about you. Yeah, you're gay." And I'm like, "Yeah, you know, I've got a significant other." And they're like, "Yeah, I don't want you as a nurse because I don't feel comfortable with you."
And that's what gets me too, is that like, I feel like in terms of the community, I feel like if we, you know, because I'm gay too, I feel like, you know, our sexuality is always the forefront of every conversation, and it can have negative effects. Like, for instance, when I was working, I'm not going to mention the place of the name because I don't want to incriminate anyone, but when I was working at a restaurant here in Richmond, I had an instance with my boss. I worked there for 2 weeks, and it was great. Like, the environment was really chill, you know, things were going really good. And the minute I met the general manager of the restaurant, she told me, well, she approached me and she asked me why I smiled so much. And I told her I'm just in a really good mood. And in my head, I was like, I don't see the point in me coming to work with a negative attitude because it's going to make everyone negative. And I'm trying not to be a negative person. Like, I was trying my best to be as positive as I can be because I'm naturally, like, I just grew up a negative person. That's how I've been my whole life. And I don't want to be like that anymore. So at that point in my life, I was like, I'm just going to be positive about this. And I had just came out recently, so I was already not in a good mental state. But when she said that, I was like, it threw me back for a second. And then when I told her, I was like, I'm just in a really good mood. And she was like, "Are you a fairy?" And in the back of my head, I was like, I've been called that before. And this when kids were beating the shit out of me.
Yeah.
And telling me that the reason they were hitting me and hurting me was because I was a fairy and I was a faggot. And so in my head, I was like, I'm at work right now. I'm being paid by someone to work here. And they just called me a fairy.
Yeah.
So I was at a loss for words, and being the smart ass that I am, I was like, well, I don't have wings and I don't fly, so I guess I'm not. And so immediately after that, she was like, "Oh, you're totally a fairy." And so she went with my other boss, and I heard them giggling and talking about me. After that, my hours got cut drastically. I wasn't allowed to work as much. I got told that the reason I couldn't work was because they were overstaffed with 2 people in the kitchen. I would come to work and get held at least 30 minutes every time before my shift. I would call my mom and be like, "Is this illegal? I don't know what to do." And she told me that it was illegal. I didn't know it was illegal at the time. But they would hold me 30 minutes and they wouldn't let me leave. And they said if I left, they wouldn't let me work. So I stayed and I waited for them to let me work. And I would work 15 to 20 minutes and then get sent home. I would go weeks without pay. And mind you, college student living with someone, I have bills I have to pay.
Yeah.
So I wasn't even able to hold up my end of that. I couldn't even support myself. So I finally quit, but I knew in my head that the reason that happened to me was because of my sexuality, and I couldn't prove that. And to my knowledge that I've done some research, that I don't think there are laws to protect that here. I don't think they've changed.
There's actually none in Kentucky where they protect people because of their sexuality. So.
And I'm actually going to do more research and put more stuff out about that. But when I did the research at the time, when I was doing the project for Ida, it wasn't legal. Like, it wasn't illegal to do that. No. And I couldn't prove that it was my sexuality, but I knew that that's what it was.
Yeah. And that's, like, growing up in Hazard, it was really difficult because you had people, it's such a small, like, it's not really a small town, what you would consider small, but everyone knows each other. And like, my friends and stuff, of course, they would go home and tell their parents, be like, "Hey, Austin's gay." And their parents would immediately be like, "Oh, well, he's gay. I don't want you hanging out with him."
So would you say that it was the younger generation that's more friendly and that was more of an ally, and it was kind of the older generation that just wasn't used to it or exposed to it, and that's why they had such a negative reaction to it?
Absolutely. Like, I had people, I was in theater at the time, and I had people, and I would tell them, I'd be like, "Hey, I'm gay." And they'd be like, "No, you're not." And I'm like, "Yeah, I am." And they're like, "Cool, whatever." And then we would go on and not even worry about it. And there were even people that would stand up for me in high school, be like, you know, there would be people, of course, mocking and bullying, but then there'd be people be standing up for him and be like, "Oh, stop, don't worry about it," you know, being actually really friendly and supportive. But then you had people that were slightly older that was like, you know, 30, 40, 50 years old that would literally just call you everything they could and like condemn you and like push you down in the mud because you were different than what they thought and different than what they wanted you to be.
Do you think the reason that they have that reaction is because they weren't properly exposed to that? And to me specify that, I blame the media a lot of the times, as well as blaming people for not doing their own research. I think that people don't get exposed, especially in regions like this. I don't think they're properly exposed to the outside world. All you hear about are news stories with negative impact. For instance, when it comes to people not from this country, when it comes to immigrants, you mostly hear negative things about immigrants that come to this country, and the people, and that part is on the media, and that's their part to blame. Where it's our part to blame, and the people that are here, their fault is that they don't do enough research and they believe everything the media tells them. So do you think that because of that, even though you grew up here, they still thought they had those negative thoughts about you because of that?
I think one of the big reasons, was kind of the media portrayal, but also they were kind of stuck in this mentality that their parents believed a certain way, their grandparents believed a certain way, so they have to believe the same way. And it was always that. It was like, well, my parents they're against gays, they're against, immigrants. I have to be against it. And that's not really the case. Like, you can have differing thoughts, you can have differing opinions, and, you can have this, but you kind of have to suck it up and you have to take it. But they were kind of just stuck in this mentality that they were right, and their parents were right, and their grandparents were right. And
no matter how it affected someone else.
Yeah, no matter how, and then it got so stuck in their head that they were right, that it turned into violence, that it turned into bullying and mocking other people and just flat out being disrespectful.
And in terms of stuff like that, I think bullying needs to have a larger scale attention because it is a serious thing. I think that people don't realize that when these young kids go to schools like this, and you have young kids who are questioning their sexuality, they're probably dealing with a lot at home. I know from personal experience they're dealing a lot with their own head. They're dealing a lot with battling themselves. And to have the other outside influence to tell you you're also wrong, people don't realize that has such a huge impact on someone who's questioning themselves. That's the reason a lot of people commit suicide. It's the reason a lot of people, I think, resort to violence, because they're never given the chance to be understood. And I'm not excusing any of that. I'm not saying any of that is right. I'm saying that I think that people in general just need to understand other people. And like I was telling you before when we started this interview, is that we're taught to hate each other. So it's our job to break that vicious cycle and stop that.
There's actually, I went to grade school and high school with this kid who was a couple years younger than me. And he actually just lived kind of the holler down below us. And he was gay. He never came out to anybody. He never told anyone, not even his friends. And he was bullied for it, and he was told that he was wrong so much that he went out in the middle of the road and he shot himself and killed himself. And the parents were like, oh, well, it wouldn't, it was because he was gay and all this and that. And it was because of all these reasons. They didn't want to accept that they pushed this negativity on someone to the point where they felt so wrong that they wanted to kill themselves and just get away from it all. And it kind of hits you that people back home, people back in Eastern Kentucky, and this was a couple years ago, they didn't really care. They were like, oh, well, something was wrong with him. Or they didn't really acknowledge the fact that, hey, I bullied this person. I made this person feel so insecure about themselves, so wrong about themselves, that they felt better not living on this earth anymore. And it's kind of that mentality in Eastern Kentucky that's kind of got them into the hole that they're in right now. They're very not understanding of people. And it's kind of it's very difficult to even, to be black, to be Asian, to be gay,
to be different in Appalachia,
to be anything other than a white cisgender male in Appalachia. And it's one of the reasons that I moved here.
Do you feel like it's in a way changing because of the conversations we're having nowadays? And do you feel like maybe it's starting to change?
I like to hope so, and I like to think it is, because you have more people who are actually thinking about, okay, well, maybe Jim down the road, he's never been with a woman, he's never been married. Maybe he's not so horrible. Maybe he's gay. And then, maybe there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, because the reason I was asking was because when I first joined the military, I had a negative reaction, and it was difficult for me. But as time went on, I found more people were accepting of me, and my unit grew. The people that I was training with, a lot of them grew to accept me, and I felt at the end when I got out, I felt actually a part of something finally. but it was because I was having conversations with people, and people changed their minds. And I also ran into people who never had an issue with me, and I had a lot of allies who are from this area. But again, like I've been saying, I don't think they've never gotten any attention for that.
I think it's kind of, they're getting better. I think it's the more they're talking, the more they're learning that, hey, just because someone's gay or just because someone's black or Asian or just because someone's different doesn't mean they're bad. Doesn't mean they're out to get
Just because they're different
whatever.
doesn't mean that you have to treat them differently.
Yeah, maybe, I'm the same that I've always been. Like ever since I was little, I knew I was different. I knew I wasn't the straight guy. And, my parents found out. They acted a little negatively. But then they changed their mind. They finally understood that, hey, this is still the Austin that we loved and cared about.
And that's what my family too is that, it was negative at first, but eventually my parents grew to accept it, and now it's not as big of an issue as it used to be. But I continually had conversations with them. I approached them with things that I was uncomfortable with, and I let them know that I was going to listen to them, because I feel like a lot of misconception too is that, people everyone on every stance doesn't want to listen to anyone.
No.
And it's like you were saying, everyone wants to be right. And in terms of my sexuality, I do want to be right. I think I'm right. My sexuality, there's nothing wrong with it. But I had to learn to also silence myself for a little bit. I wanted to hear why they were disapproving of it, so that then I could educate them on why their stance is harmful to me. And I think because I gave them the chance to talk to me and that they were respectful, thankfully, I think because we had those conversations that I found out things about what my mom was going through when I came out that I never knew about, and that more or less added to why she had a negative reaction first, because she was going through things that I didn't know about that were life-threatening. And, after all that, after she went through everything that she went through, we're now on the best terms we've ever been. We talk about things all the time. I've opened up to her about things that I never thought I'd be able to, but that's because we were talking about stuff. We had conversations, and that's what I really hope for this project, is that it sparks conversations like I have with my mother, so that way maybe other people who haven't had the chance with their parents or anyone can have a conversation like that and change the way the relationship is and change the way they view each other.
And
in a broader sense.
I think education is so important when it comes to things like this, because I was always taught through religion and stuff that my sexuality was wrong. And that kind of hits hard, on you when you are forced, from a very, very young age. When you're crawling, you go to a church where it's like, you're wrong, you're going to hell, you're a horrible person, because you are different. And I think it's very important that we educate people to be like, hey, just because someone's different doesn't mean they're wrong, doesn't mean they're actually, they might have differing opinions than you, but you can't really say that they're going to hell. You can't really condemn them. You can't really, bully them or make them feel a certain way, because to someone else, you're wrong. So you kind of have to educate them and be like, hey, just because you agree or you disagree with me doesn't mean that, I'm going to hell. Doesn't mean that you have to make someone feel a certain way. You need to accept them. You need to understand them at a deep personal level. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard in Eastern Kentucky. It really is. And it's still kind of hard here in Richmond. Even though it is a little bit bigger of a town, a little bit more open, a little bit more understanding, it is still kind of hard. I currently live in Berea, and there are people that live near us that are they are very not accepting of me and my boyfriend living together in his grandmother's house that we inherited. Even though his grandmother was perfectly fine with it, there are still people who come over and be like, you should come to church, you should be saved, you should come, drop everything you're doing and come to church.
And I think in that aspect, I think that what's happening in your situation is you're being exposed to the wrong kinds of people in terms of religion. I know religion's a big controversy anyway, but I thankfully I've met people who have a different stance on religion, who do believe in some things that haven't pushed that on me, thankfully.
I have a friend who, she's amazing, she's a wonderful person. We joke and kid all the time about her going to church and stuff, and she's a really, really good Christian person. But she is accepting of me and Trevor. She is accepting of everything we stand for. And even things she doesn't really agree with, she understands and she respects. Do
you feel like most of your backlash has been from a religious point of view? And also to clarify, do you think that it's mostly common in smaller areas like this and places that you grew up in that haven't been exposed properly? Do you think that that adds to more backlash of what you've been through?
I think it is, honestly, because you kind of have, like, when in eastern Kentucky, in Hazard, you have these families who are generations and generations and generations of a certain Church
Ideology
of Christ.
too.
And it's just a branch of Christian. There's so many branches. And they believe that their branch is the right one. And though, like, generations going back, 7, 8 generations have gone to this church. And suddenly, someone's disagreeing with them. Someone in their family is going against them. It's like, they're like, whoa. I mean, because they want that heritage to continue. They want to be able to say, hey, everybody in my family have always been Christian. And then somebody disagrees with them, somebody, in their own family, their own children, or, maybe their siblings or whatever disagrees, then they're like, it kind of hits them and they're like, whoa, I can't have that. And so then they start thinking about, how can I bully this person to come to church? How can I make them feel like they're wrong? Can I change them? And that's not really the right way to look at things.
So growing up in Appalachia, do you feel that you also, I guess, catch heat from the label of being from Appalachia? I guess people who aren't from Appalachia, do you think that they view you negatively and immediately think that you're like the negative people they've seen in the media?
Oh Lord, yeah. Growing up, I was one of these people, these little kids that had the crooked teeth, that drank Mountain Dew and played with race cars and run wild. But I think that was honestly being a kid in Appalachia. That's what you done. Like, that's how you grew up. And then as you progress and you go forward, you kind of learn who you are, you evolve, and you become a person. And the media thinks that just because you're from Kentucky, they have this kind of negative stereotype of, you're a hillbilly, this is, your stereotypical go out and hunt, wear camo every day, kind of masculine homophobic.
And not there's anything wrong with that. It's just that they don't.
Yeah.
They assume that
everyone's that way, just because you're from a certain area.
And they also, I feel like, assume that everyone here is negative.
Yeah.
Some people here are negative, but as I've said before, and I think that too, that there are people here who aren't like that. There are people who are very accepting. I think that they just don't get the attention they need. So I feel like some of them also feel like we do. They're afraid to speak out. They're afraid to say, hey, I'm an ally, even though I'm not gay, even though I'm not part of what you're expressing, and I don't physically feel that, I am accepting. And I feel like they're sometimes afraid to express that because they're going to be labeled as what we're being labeled as, just on a different spectrum.
And they're going to be mocked and made fun of and bullied just because they support somebody. Like, I've seen it in high school all the time. Like, some of my closest friends got called faggot and queer and all of these names.
Well, a friend in my unit, we had a really good conversation. He was telling me that he gets mocked all the time, and his sexuality is questioned all the time because he supports that. He's straight, and he likes being with women, but everyone assumes that he is gay because he supports gay rights, or he supports gay marriage, or he supports anything, and he supports the community. And I feel like that's also wrong. I feel like you shouldn't group him and make him feel isolated and force ideas on him that he's not comfortable with, even though he's accepting. Accept him for him and realize that he can be straight and an ally. He can be straight and be okay with someone being gay. That doesn't mean that he's gay. Yeah,
there's a lot of these kind of negative things, like even just supporting a certain idea or a certain belief. Like, I had people who, believe that abortion is wrong. And I had people that believe that, you should be able to get an abortion. And they literally would support it, even though maybe they didn't really agree with it or disagree or whatever. They would support it and they would respect each other's beliefs. But then I had other people who literally, they were so stuck in that mentality of I'm right and you're wrong, that they would fight and they would throw all of these fits and try to sign laws into laws that prohibited you and all these things, and there was no understanding. And it relates back to the question you asked, if I got a negative stereotype just because I'm from Appalachia. Yeah, because they have this mentality that I am kind of the backwards, not understanding person, and they think that I believe that I'm always right and everybody else is always wrong.
And I feel like I've gotten that too. I find it hard for me to even have conversations with people in the community sometimes, or people in general, just anywhere, that if I disagree with them, then I'm against them. And I'm like, no, I'm not against anyone. I'm able to think for myself, and I don't appreciate when, I feel like, me personally, I already get a lot of heat from the world itself. Growing up here, gay is not easy. So I've already obtained that much heat.
Yeah.
So why would you want to make an enemy of me when I'm not trying to be your enemy?
Exactly. And I've had people from, like, my grandpa had a lung transplant in St. Louis. We went back there every so often to have checkups and stuff. And I would go there, and I could see that people would look at you different ways. Like, they would hear your voice, and they would either be like, "Oh, cool, you have a really nice Appalachian accent," or they would kind of snicker under their breath and be like, "You're a hillbilly." Whereas, other people were really supportive and be like, "Cool, you have a cool accent. Can you talk more?" And it's really like, that's one of the things that I've noticed here, is that you start seeing these people that kind of have this negative look at you just because you're from Appalachia. I've had people that look at me and be like, "Oh, you can't be gay because you're from the mountains."
And that's what I want people to understand through this project, is that, even if you're catching heat and being judged and you're feeling the same way, why would you do that to someone else? For instance, like, if someone's like from another state that comes here, I feel like I've heard that they have negative reactions to this state, and I've had the same reactions to the state too, and I'm trying to change my outlook about where I come from, and I'm trying to appreciate where I come from and try to make the best of it and make it better and repair it. But I know that, like, when people talk about how bad Kentucky is and how bad the people are here, sometimes I'm like, you're talking about me. Like, I'm from here. My family's from here. And I sometimes get a little irritated because, I sometimes say negative things about this place, and I'm working on changing that. But I'm still from here. So I feel like, this will always be part of me. And I never thought I would say that, but this place will always be a part of me.
Yeah.
And I feel like this place has helped shape me, and I feel like it's my duty, growing up here, and it's my duty to help it. It's my duty to make Appalachia, make Kentucky better, because it's where my family comes from, and I want to break the vicious cycle that's been in my family for generations and generations. I want to break that and help others do the same.
I love, and that's what I like about the project, is that it's trying to make everyone feel human, and that just because you're in a certain area or you're a certain religion, race, sexuality, you're still human. That
everyone has a story, even if you don't agree with it, that just listen to it. And that's another thing too, leading to the second question, what do you think is the reason for most conflict?
Unfortunately, I would have to say that it's probably my sexuality in the area that I'm in. The uneducation.
And like a broader spectrum, what would you say is the reason? Because you were saying that, you made a comment earlier about how you were talking about how people just want to always be right and that they don't care about anything. Would you say that is the reason for a lot of conflict?
I would say, honestly, because even the world as a whole today, even across countries, across languages, no one wants to understand each other. No one wants to listen. Like, you have people in America who think that America is the best country in the world. And I'm not saying anything negative about that. But they don't want to listen to any other country because they believe that we're right. We're always right. And then you have people from other countries who are like, "Oh, look at America. Look at how they are. I don't want to ever be like them." Instead of listening to our opinions and our views and stuff. And then even within the U.S. right now, you have people who out west are, they look at, Eastern people, and they're like, "Oh, well, I don't want to be like them."
And then you have people from here looking at them like, "I don't want to be like that."
Yeah.
You just have so much hate that we're taught to hate each other.
And no understanding, no talking,
none.
No actual setting down, and instead of bickering, no talking. They just want to be like, "I'm right, you're wrong." They're end of story.
And I've experienced situations in both aspects where I've sat down with someone to have a conversation that's a very controversial topic and they don't want to talk about it. No. And in my mind, I'm like, I understand where you're coming from, but I'm personally able to have a conversation with you about a controversial topic without blowing up. I learned to do that. I can do that now. I used to not be able to, but finally maturing and just realizing that the world isn't always as it seems, I've learned to be able to hear different perspectives and have controversial conversations without there being any, like, I mean, yeah, there's a little bit of tension, but it's not to the point where we can't have a civil conversation.
I think honestly that's kind of our education here at EKU is we have, especially through art history, especially learning different cultures and taking, religion classes and stuff, we've learned to kind of look at other things instead of just focusing on our religion or our area or our belief, our sexuality. We look at other people. We look at, how did art impact society? How did this person, this religion, how does it impact the area that it originated from? How does it impact people here? Like, we've been educated on that. And I think that's a really big issue going forward is that we have to educate people. We have to talk. Because I can have a genuine conversation with someone who disagrees with what I believe in. But if they are being arrogant, they are being kind of an asshole, and not being understanding, I get short-tempered because I can't, you can't have a conversation with someone who is not willing to listen.
In an instance like that, I have to back away. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, we agree to disagree, but maybe another time we can have this conversation.
Yeah. And it's really difficult because then they don't want to stop. In my own experiences, they don't want to stop. They want to be like, well, why don't you agree? And they'll keep pushing the issue. And I think...
And I've also had to learn to let people just have their own opinion. I'm not... I've learned to realize that not everyone's going to feel the same way that I do, but it doesn't mean we can't talk about it. Yeah. Because, even talking about the most recent conflict with mass shootings, which just happened in Florida, I see all over my Facebook feed about all these people just arguing and bickering, and no one's just sitting down and talking about what's actually happening.
No one's...
And I feel like... Go ahead, sorry to interrupt you.
Just no one's willing to, look at the problems. And, even if you have differing opinions. I know there's people who are, for very, very strict gun control, and people who are like, we shouldn't have gun control at all.
Yeah.
And instead of them looking at the problem at hand, they want to look at their own individual problems.
And I think also a good thing to do in terms of any problem, not just the problem that we just talked about, but I think any problem, if you try to understand why someone feels a certain way, and that's what I've been doing, is that when someone has a different opinion, I want to understand why they have that opinion, like what drives them to have that. Like, for instance, with my sexuality, I ask people, why do you feel this way? And I try to understand why they feel that way, so that way I can try to relate to them and maybe help change their mind.
Yeah.
Like I was saying with my mother, when I actually talked to her and we had an honest conversation for the first time ever, I realized that I was very selfish when I came out. I was going through a lot, but I also didn't let my mom tell me how she felt. I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear what she was going through. I chose not to listen to her. And because of that, it caused our relationship to break a little bit. For a while we weren't speaking, and I'm partly to blame for that because, yes, my sexuality is important to me, and yes, I don't think I should be treated differently, but I also need to learn that I need to listen to people too. And
the same thing with my parents too happened when I came out. I didn't actually get the chance to be like, hey, I'm gay. They actually found out. And so that led to issues of being like, oh, well, you hid this from us and blah, blah, blah. And there was so many, we were just kind of just butting heads all the time. And my whole family stopped talking for around a year.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of issues after that where you realize, hey, we were both, I should have told you. I should have talked to you about it. But then again, I think in my head, would that have changed anything?
Well, the thing with my family and my mom, when we were talking, she admitted that she wished she had a better reaction and she wished she could take what she said back. Yeah. And I'm like, I thank you for that. And so whenever I talked to her, I got to explain to her why I had a hard time telling her, of why I was scared to tell her. I got to open up to her about really personal things that I never told her. And she understood why it was difficult for me to tell her. And then I understood why it was difficult for her to at first accept it. And she's came around to it now, and our relationship is great, and she's really just, we both have learned to really understand each other and have this amazing relationship. But it's because we put our differences aside for 1 minute and we heard each other speak.
Yeah. And that's now my parents, they're very understanding. They're very accepting. They honestly think of my significant other more than me.
Mine too. They always ask
they're
about my
always like,
fiance all the time.
oh, well, how's Trevor? And I'm like, you never asked how I was. But it's always that. And so it's a lot more personal now. It's a lot more fun. It feels like a family. Whereas I still have members of my family, members of my father's side of the family, who do not talk to me, who refuse to acknowledge I exist. And honestly, they very negatively, like very, very negatively, like have an opinion on me. And it's unfortunate. Like at one point in time, I don't want to go into too many details and drag this out, but when I came out, when everything was going on, my dad's side of the family literally would message me and harass me for like pages of messaging, saying that I was wrong and I was dragging the family's name through the mud and that I was going to go to hell, and that literally like saying that I should die and just get out, like stop, like I should change my name and everything because I'm not, like they don't want anything to do with me. And me not even message them, me not even talk to them, literally just from my parents being like, hey, Austin's gay, they start messaging me and start harassing me. And
do you think because of experiences like that, that's why you've had to learn to build a really hard exterior?
Like, yeah, honestly, like now, like I very, very much, like I'm very cautious about who I talk to. I'm very cautious about who I become friends with now.
Well, because I've noticed a common theme with someone who comes out, whether it be gay, lesbian, trans, or anything like that. We all have a really tough exterior. And I don't think people understand why we have such a tough exterior and why sometimes it's not easy to talk to us, or why sometimes we come off might be aggressive, because it's our safety that we're putting out there. And, you know,
literally, like I was afraid during that time, during that year, that 2-year, 3-year period of me coming out. I was afraid for my safety.
And that's what I told my mom. I was like, that's why I was so aggressive, and that's why I came off as so mean and vile, was because I was scared. I didn't know. I didn't have anyone. I felt like
the only safety blanket I had was a couple friends that I grew up with, and like 1 or 2 teachers that I had in grade school. Other than that, I had no one to talk to. Like my ex at the time was very manipulative, very, very wrong, and was not a very good support blanket. And so I had like just a few friends and just a few things, and at the time I resorted to drinking a lot. And it's because of things like that where you have instances where you don't have people that's understanding, where you don't have people to talk to.
You feel like you're alone.
Yeah, where you are alone. And that's, I think, one of the reasons you have people that resort to, you know, medicine, drug use, alcoholism, you know, trying to cope with, you know, all these issues that's going on. And it's rough. And then once you get over it, you know, you've learned, hey, you have a hard exterior. You're like, nothing really phases you anymore. You're like, whatever, I don't care. And that's, well, for me anyway. Like, people will say things and be rude, and I'm just like, cool, whatever. Because I've went through enough that it really doesn't bother me anymore. So that's my hard exterior.
So going to the next question, what do you think it means to be human?
I think being human is having your differences and being yourself at the same time. Like, everybody's different. Whether you agree, disagree, whether you're gay, straight, black, white, everyone's different. Whether you agree with your family, you disagree. Whether you agree with your area you're growing up in, everyone's different. Everyone, like you said earlier, has a story. And I think that's what makes us human. I think in my opinion, if God wanted everyone to be the same, He would have built robots. Like, everyone's different. Everyone's got a story. Everyone's got, you know, things going on in their lives. And that's what makes us who we are. That's what makes us humans. It's because we get to evolve, we get to change, we get to have our own opinions. And that's what I like to think makes us who we are.
So, to wrap up a little bit, do you What do you hope people watching this video or even looking at the project get from this?
I hope they think about their past. I hope they get a chance to think about what they've said to other people, kind of the stereotypes they've held in their head of other people. I hope they think about maybe how they've not understood other people or had a chance to talk to other people. And then just, I hope they get a chance to look and see that everybody in Kentucky, everybody in the world as a whole, are different. And that maybe if they just sit down and listen and sit down and hear their story for just a second, that they won't maybe have these negative views of everyone. Maybe they can just get together and solve these big issues in the world that,
you can finally see the
solved.
Humanity of the world.
Yeah. Try to save the world instead of worry about yourself for once. That's what I hope.
And then another thing too, what do you have to say to anyone watching this too about, if they feel the same way that you do growing up here, and also if the people that you know here deserve the right kind of attention, what would you say to that and say to them?
One thing I want to say is if you went through the stuff that I've went through and you have went through the same things of being bullied, of going through a very tough coming out, of going through kind of like alcohol use to cope with things, and like even thoughts of suicide and depression, I promise, I know everyone says this, but it does get better. As you progress, as you grow up, it does get better. It may not seem like it with the current situation of the world, but I promise that 6 years ago, sitting where I was and sitting where I am now, I never thought it would have changed. I never thought it would have. But it does get so much better. Life gets so much nicer. It becomes more of a life to live. And you just got to keep pushing forward. You have to talk to people. You have to be willing to understand people, even if you disagree with them. You have to be willing to talk.